Hey everyone, welcome to the Crossings online service. My name is Andrew, and I am so glad that you're with us today. Now, in 2013, a couple known as John and Mary were walking their dog in the outskirts of their property by the Sierra Mountains. Now, you have to understand this area. This is the kind of place where not many people live, so you got lots of property. It's the opposite of what we have here in Orange County. So one day, John and Mary, they're out, they're walking their dog, and they see this old tin can. Now, they had probably walked by this same spot about 1,000 times before, but for some reason on this day, they paused, they went over to this can, they pulled it out of the ground, and they found inside gold coins. Now, after celebrating their discovery, John and Mary got to thinking, they're like, well, we are in the original gold rush area. What if there are more cans full of more gold coins on our property? So they returned a few days later to that exact same spot with a metal detector. And there they found another tin can of gold coins, and then another and another, until all told they found 8 cans full of 1,411 gold coins valued at, get this, $10 million. Today, it is known as the Saddle Ridge treasure. I mean, can you imagine finding a treasure worth $10 million? It's everyone's dream, isn't it? This is why people go to Vegas. I mean, no one goes to Vegas for the food or the 120-degree desert heat. You see, people go because they dream of hearing this sound. You know that sound, don't you? The sound that means you have found treasure. Now, why are we talking about this today? It's because one day, Jesus told a story, a parable. Now, a parable is a short, made-up story with a very real point. And so one day, Jesus is teaching, and he tells this parable. It begins this way. Matthew chapter 13, verse 44. He says, "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field." Now, this phrase, the kingdom of heaven, is the phrase we have been talking about over the last few weeks. It was the primary message of Jesus. So maybe you're watching and you're like, that's great, Andrew. Well, what on earth is the kingdom of heaven? I'm glad you asked. The kingdom of heaven is the open invitation to participate in the power, purpose, and presence of God here and now. In other words, the with God life. The life we can live knowing God is for us, with us. God loves us. It is available not in some distant day in the future in heaven, but it is available right here, right now. And so Jesus tells us, Matthew chapter 13, verse 44, he says, the kingdom of heaven, the with God life, is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. And then, in his joy, went and sold all he had and bought that field. That's it. That's the whole story, the whole parable. So over the next few minutes, let's unpack it. You see, one day there is a man and he's walking through a field. Now this guy isn't necessarily looking for treasure, he's just living his life. Maybe he's running an errand, or maybe he's headed to work. We don't exactly know. He's just living his life, and then boom, he stumbles upon this massive treasure. Now, Jesus doesn't give us a lot of detail intentionally because he wants us to find our way into this story. You see, this man, he could be anyone. This guy, he could be rich or poor, young or old, religious or not so much. He could be married or single or divorced or widowed. We don't know because the background doesn't matter. What matters is that one day this man finds something that will forever change his life. Jesus says, this is what the kingdom of heaven, this is what the with God life is like. One day, you may just be going through your everyday routine, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, something happens that changes you. We see this happen all the time around here at the Crossing. One of my favorite things we do on our campus is after each service, we do this thing called Connect 5. where I get to, with another staff member, tell every new person 5 quick things about our church in 5 minutes that I think everyone should know. But here's what I love about that time, is the stories. I love hearing the stories of what brings people to our church. For example, a few weeks ago, I met someone brand new. She was brand new to our church, and I asked her, I said, "What brought you to the Crossing?" And I just loved her story. She told me that she works right across the street at Stater Brothers. And then she told me that she would just have these customers who would come in and they were always so nice to her. And she told me they were patient and kind and they seemed to genuinely care about her. And then she said she noticed that a lot of these customers who were so nice, they wore these t-shirts that said The Crossing Church on them. And so one day, one of these customers actually invited her to this church. And so she said yes. And then she tells me that she showed up and she realized, oh my gosh, everyone at this church is just so nice. And then she sat in the service and she told me the music, it just spoke to her soul and that the message was exactly what she needed to hear. And she told me that there was something that happened that day that she needed in her life. Now, what happened to this woman? Well, she was just going through her life and then she happened to stumble upon something that is in the process of changing her. You see, stories like this happen all the time. Almost every week I meet people who just moved to Orange County and something told them, oh, I need to find a church. And so they go on Google or Yelp and they read reviews about how this is a safe place to ask questions about faith, about how warm and welcoming this place is, about how the good news of Jesus is proclaimed here. Then they usually watch an online service just like you are doing right now. And they decide they need to get connected here. And eventually they experience a God who loves them, a God who forgives them. They experience a with God life. Others show up because, I kid you not, they are buying plants at Armstrong Gardens and they hear the music and something inside of them says, I should go to church there. And they do. And God begins to move and they hear about a God who loves them and sent his son for them. They hear that God is active and working in the world. They experience the kingdom of heaven. They weren't looking for it. They just seemingly stumbled upon it. That's this guy in our parable. He is going about his everyday life and then out of the blue, he stumbles upon something he can't take his eyes off. And I know there are some of you who are watching that this is your story. You're watching because a family member shared this with you and something is happening right now to you as you listen. You feel this feeling right here and you wonder, man, maybe life is better with God. And I say this to you because I know that this is also my story. You see, I grew up going to this little church full of really nice people. But that church didn't have a kids ministry like The Crossing has a kids ministry. So I grew up sitting in a church listening to boring messages that had nothing to do with my life. So I grew up believing that following Jesus meant going to a church and just being bored for an hour. By college, I'd walked away from church and faith until I ended up at Illinois State University. And after about a year there of living the typical college student life, I knew that something was missing. I knew I needed more out of life. And you know what? I had this friend who one day invited me to a church a lot like The Crossing, where I sat in a seat a lot like people do on the weekends here. And for those few moments, it felt like the pastor was speaking directly to me. And so I came back again and again, and I heard message after message about how God is with us, God is for us, God loves us, God grows us, God changes us, and God forgives us. And I had to know more. You see, what I experienced is exactly what the guy in the parable experiences, that the kingdom of heaven has great value. You see, when we really hear the message of Jesus, when you hear about a God who wants to be with you, it does something to you, doesn't it? I mean, think about that for a moment. Who are the people that you want to be with? Let me take this on a little tangent for a moment. I'm in my low 40s, and I pretty much never want to leave my house at night. Like, never. So if you get me out of my house after 7 p.m., you know you must be pretty important to me. You see, I want to only be with people who matter to me. And that is the message of Jesus. God wants to be with you. He considers you an important person. You matter to the God who created the universe. You see, that message should stop us in our tracks. It should cause us to pause. That God cares, that God likes someone like you. You see, the kingdom of heaven has great value. But that's not all. Matthew 13 again. Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. And then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. So this man, he's just walking along. He finds a treasure. He sees the value of it. And then intuitively, he just knows that this valuable treasure will cause some changes to his life. His life is going to change. You see, the kingdom of heaven has great value, and the kingdom of heaven creates great change. You see, this man realizes, I'm going to need to sell all that I have to buy this field. This valuable treasure changes the path that my life is on. Now, there is such an important truth here. You see, encountering something of great value will always lead to great change, while encountering something of little value will always lead to little change. Let me give you an example of this. The other day, I was out for a run, and then all of a sudden before me, just lying there on the ground, I stumbled upon treasure. I found a nice, crisp $1 bill. And I'll tell you, I saw it and I thought to myself, I'm like, nice. And I looked around to make sure no one had just dropped it. And then I grabbed my treasure and I put it in my pocket. But then you know what I did? I kept running. Because finding $1 is nice, but it doesn't really change anything in my life, does it? I mean, in that moment, I didn't fall on my knees crying out in joy. I didn't immediately stop and call my wife and tell her, be like, babe, drop everything. We're going to Hawaii. I didn't do any of those things because no one's life is changed by finding a $1 bill. But when you find a treasure of great value, everything changes. You see, when John and Mary, when they found the Saddle Ridge treasure, their entire world changed. How they lived changed. Where they lived changed. What they did for work changed. Every area of their lives were changed because of finding a treasure of great value. That's what we find in this parable. When this guy finds a treasure, what he does is he hides it again. And then in his joy, went and sold all he had and bought that field. You see, finding this treasure of great value, it comes with a cost. I mean, this guy in the story, he realizes to receive this treasure, I will have to go home and get rid of all these things in my life that are of lesser value. I mean, he's got to go back home and he's got to sell that 20-year-old sofa in his living room. And then he's got to get rid of that 2005 Dodge minivan. And then he's got to sell his old Xbox. I mean, whatever he has, he's going to have to get rid of all of it in order to really gain the treasure before him. And I'll tell you, this happens when it comes to faith as well. There will come times in your life where to experience what Jesus has for you, the with God life, it will cost you something. Let me give you a couple examples from my life. I shared those with those of you who are in our small groups a few weeks ago. But back in my early 20s, my favorite day of the week was Sunday. And I wish I could tell you it was because I loved going to church. And I did in my early 20s like going to church. But I had this routine, you see. I would go to church early, I would enjoy it, but then I would head home. And I would sit on the couch and I would watch 6 hours of football. It was awesome. Then I would grab some food just in time to go back to my couch and watch Sunday night football. It was amazing. I loved it every single week until I had this pastor ask me to lead a high school boys small group. Now, the moment he told me about this small group, something inside of me said like, oh, I should do this. High school is such a tough time for everyone. Andrew, you could step in, you could do this. And so I told him, I'm like, oh, I'm interested. But then he told me the youth group meets on Sunday afternoons, meaning if I serve, I would miss out on my favorite time of the week, Sunday football. Now, you may laugh at that, but 22-year-old Andrew loved football. So I began to backpedal and say, I'm not so sure this is going to work. And so the pastor, he asked me, he said, hey, just pray about it. Which, by the way, is such a dirty trick because I did pray about it. And of course, God told me, Andrew, you don't need to watch 9 hours of football every Sunday. So I stepped in and I began to serve. And you know what? I loved it. And for the next 4 years, I walked with that small group of guys through the ups and downs of high school. We celebrated when one of them made the JV basketball team, and we celebrated as they got ready for homecoming dances, and we walked through difficulties like breakups and parents going through divorce. We did all the ups and downs of high school. And I'll tell you, saying yes to serving, it not only helped those guys in my small group, but it also shaped me. It encouraged me and blessed me to this day. I believe that group of guys did more for me than I ever did for them. And today I look back at that cost of giving up a few hours of football every week. And I think to myself, thank God I said yes. Because what I gained was of such greater value than what I gave up. Can I give you one more example? A couple years after that, I heard a pastor give a talk about giving. Now, I want to let you in on a little secret. Very few pastors like talking about money and giving. Mostly because very few people like listening to pastors talking about money or giving. But this pastor gave a talk about tithing. Now, tithing is giving the first 10% of your money back to God. And the idea of it is no matter how much or little you make, you give your first 10% to God as an act of trust. Well, again, back then, when I heard about tithing, I was in my early 20s and I was poor. I was working a couple of part-time jobs, and just being honest, I am not naturally generous. I grew up in a family with a single mom, so for us growing up, money was always tight. And so early on, I developed this belief that whenever you have money, you better hold on tight because you might run out of it. And so when I heard some pastor talk about tithing, I thought, you know what? This message is for someone else. I'm poor. Besides, God doesn't need my little bit of money. Which actually is true. God doesn't need my money. But tithing isn't about God needing my money. It's about God changing my relationship with money. Malachi 3:10 even says, it says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, says the Lord. Then there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty. And so I made this really big decision back then. I decided I'm going to give my first 10% of every paycheck back to what God is doing in this world. I began to tithe to the church I was attending at the time. And I'll tell you, it was scary at first. It was painful at first. But looking back, it is one of the best decisions I've ever made. You see, over time, I saw how God used this to change me. I saw how God showed up, how God always provided for me. I saw how I was now part of what God was doing through my church. I experienced back then what Jesus says in Acts chapter 20, verse 35. Jesus says, it is more blessed to give than to receive. To this day, my wife and I, we practice giving the first 10% of everything we make back to this local church. And we experience the blessing of being part of what God is doing. I mean, for example, just last week, I mentioned to our church how we gave about 30% of last week's offering to our church to families dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and Milton. And personally, I love that my personal giving was put together with everyone else's giving, and I was part of that gift. I love that every time our church steps up to serve people in need, my resources are part of that. You see, trusting God in this area of my life has changed my relationship with money. So here's my question for you today. Is there a change God is asking you to make today? Is there an area where God is asking you to trust Him and take a step of faith that might change you? Maybe you're in an unhealthy dating relationship. and the person you're with is constantly criticizing you, constantly belittling you or blaming you or fighting with you, and you know deep down, you feel God telling you, you got to make a change. You got to get out of this relationship. But for you, the cost, it feels too high. You're scared of being alone, or you're scared of what will happen. Or maybe that's not your story. Maybe you've been around faith and Jesus for a little while, but you're still on the fence of like fully diving in and following Jesus. You haven't made the decision because you're afraid of what will the cost be? Maybe people will judge me or think differently of me. But maybe today God is telling you it's time to make a change. It's time to say yes to the with God life. Or maybe it's at our church. Maybe God is challenging you to get involved here. Maybe you sense it's time for you to give of your time or resources here. Maybe the change God wants to bring into your life is that you no longer sit on the sidelines of what God is doing at this church, but you become part of it. You see, change, it always involves a cost. The kingdom of heaven has great value. The kingdom of heaven creates great change. And then finally, let's go back to our story one last time. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. And then, in his joy, went and sold all he had and bought that field. Yes, change comes with a cost. But this man in our parable, he went out with joy. Now, the word joy here is the Greek word hara. It is the word that communicates celebration. Now, I don't know if you've been inside of a church for a while, but often inside of churches, when it comes to celebration, there's often this little golf clap. That is not what this word hurrah means. What I want to give you an example of what it does mean. Okay, Dodgers fans, this example is just for you. You experienced this recently. Now, for those of you who aren't baseball fans, the Dodgers have been one of the best regular season teams of the last decade. Every single year, they dominate the regular season. But then when it comes to the playoffs, disaster. Their pitching falls apart. They can't hit. It's brutal and disappointing every year. But this year, they signed a guy by the name of Shohei Ohtani, a once-in-a-generation phenom. And they again had this great regular season. And when the playoffs came, this year began like most playoff years begin for the Dodgers. Immediately they go into the playoffs and the Dodgers start falling apart. They fell behind in game 1 to the Padres 3-0. It looked like this year was going to be a repeat of every single year until Shohei stepped up to the plate in the bottom of the second inning. With 2 outs, he crushes this 3-run home run that changes the trajectory of the game and ultimately the series. Now, you can watch that home run and you can see Ohtani's celebration and you see the fans' celebration. You watch everyone erupt in joy at that moment. That's this word hurrah. It means a flat out, top of your lungs, screaming celebration. Now, if you're an Angels fan watching this does not bring you great joy. It brings you great sadness. And for you, I am sorry for you. I can't help you other than to say that things may get better. Maybe, probably not. But you see, joy is a key part of the kingdom. The kingdom of heaven gives great joy. When you experience life with God, when you live in the power and purpose God created you for, it leaves us with this overwhelming sense of joy. Now, I want to be crystal clear on this. It doesn't mean that you will never be sad again. It doesn't mean that your life will go perfectly from here on out. What it does mean is when you look back at your life, what you will see is that all along the way, there was a God who was with you. There was a God who was at work in the good and the difficult moments. You see, the man in our story, he sold what he had with great joy because he knew life is better with this treasure. And life is always better in the kingdom of heaven. And that is the truth that every single one of us needs to hear today. You see, every time on our campus that we celebrate baptism, it is a moment of great joy because it means that someone experiences the with God life, that they have experienced the love and forgiveness that Jesus offers. And you see it on their faces when they come up from the water. You see the joy that they experience in that moment of experiencing the value and the change that Jesus brings to us. Every time we do child dedication, it is a moment of great joy, because it's our chance to let parents declare over their children that the kingdom of heaven has great value. The kingdom of heaven brings great change, and the kingdom of heaven gives great joy. And I want every kid at our church to experience that. So today, I want to invite you to experience this kingdom that Jesus offers, the with God life. And so today, if you have never said yes to Jesus, in a moment I'm going to pray and I'm going to invite you to have that moment with Jesus. Or if you have lost sight of the value, the change, the joy that it brings, I'm going to give you a chance to re-experience that in a moment. And of course, if you're ready to really go deeper in the with God life, I want to invite you this week to jump into our study. We have put together an amazing resource that you can find right here online, or you can pick up a free book on our campus, and together we can experience the with God life. Let's pray. So God, we come before you today. And for those of us who have never experienced your love and grace, today we welcome you into our life. We ask that you forgive us for every mistake, every sin in our life. God, for those of us who've maybe just been going through the motions of life, God, let us remember the value and the change and the joy you bring to us. Shape and mold us moving forward. And God, I pray that we would know your love and grace and mercy all the days of our life. Amen.